Hey everyone, and welcome to the Sunny Go One Piece podcast. On this episode, we're going to be catching up with episodes 298 through 300, which will cover manga chapters 415 through 418. And it's kind of crazy to think that we're already rewatching episode 300 in the series. But yeah, so this is the point where the Straw Hats' famous monster trio are gearing up for their duels against the CP9, and I can't be any more excited for that. So let's dive in. So synopsis, as Sanji and Zoro take on their remaining opponents to secure the final two keys from Jabura and Kaku, Robin desperately tries to escape Spandam as she inches ever closer to the gates of justice. So differences-wise, there actually aren't very many differences in these three episodes, just a couple extra added scenes to pad out the timing. We have during the Sanji and Jabura fight, when Jabura is trying to trick Sanji like he did with Usopp, trying to tell them that he is Robin's sister, but instead in the manga it just kind of like goes through that line, and then Sanji tries to pick up the key, and then obviously he kicks him in the chin. But in the anime, we actually get to see the full story that Jabura comes up with, all complete with this sort of storybook animation, and it's pretty funny. So I'm actually kind of glad they added this in. The other difference is we get a couple extra scenes of Luffy and Lucci versus each other during the Sanji and Jabura fight. And similarly, also happens during the Zoro and Kaku fight, where we again see Lucci battling Luffy, but this time with Frankie there as well. And so these two scenes were just added in between the fight so that they pad out a little bit more time and they fit into the 19 minutes that we actually get of new content in each episode now. But yeah, I think other than that, there's really no extra scenes or changes. Okay, so let's get into the episodes themselves. So first off, one thing you'll notice is that beginning in episode 299 and continuing all the way through episode 319, Robin's voice actor has changed. So during this time, similarly with Nami and Chopper's voice actors Akemi Okumura and Ikue Otani, respectively, Yuriko Yamaguchi also went on maternity leave, and so Robin is played by Yuko Kobayashi temporarily during this time. And it is kind of a shame that we couldn't get Yuriko Yamaguchi to play Robin the entire time, as this arc was so Robin-centric, and she is very important to the story, and it is a little weird having a different voice, especially with how good Yuriko is. But, you know, it's a very happy reason why she's not voicing, so can't really be too mad about that. Anyways, let's dive into the episodes themselves. So picking up where we left off, Usopp is unaware of what Sanji exactly meant by they can save Robin as long as he's there, but there's no time to really figure it out, as Sanji tells Nami and Usopp to hurry up and get out of there as he begins his duel with Jabura, who wastes no time in full-on attacking Sanji right away as he tanks a massive hit from him, sending him to the outer stairwell. Usopp does eventually figure it out as they're escaping and gets all heated, which is really funny. Jabura overhears this and decides that he should probably nip this in the butt, but then Sanji comes rocketing out of the smoke and lands one of the coolest kicks to date. And something about how they animate and how they do the sound design is so good here with that kick, as he just lays one square in Jabura's face, launching him into the wall. And Sanji just kind of gracefully floats back down. It's such a cool attack. Jabura definitely likes to focus on the Shigan and Tekkai aspects of the Rokushiki, as he is often seen attacking with his 10-point Shigan. But I love how Sanji easily avoids it and lands a Torajime Hash, and it really looks and sounds like it hits hard, even though the Tekkai is active. Jabura plays it off like it had no effect on him, but I love that we get to hear his inner dialogue, and he's like, what the hell is with this kick? And he later shows us his ability to actually move while in Tekkai, and mentions that he's the only one in the CP9 who can actually do that. And now that he mentions it, that was something I never really noticed, that, yeah, they all have to stand in place to do Tekkai, and even I think Lucci does too. And I don't know why this never really occurred to me, that, yeah, Tekkai is something that they all do while standing still. However, as much as I praised that initial kick that Sanji landed on Jabura, the rest of this episode's animation is pretty mediocre and almost kind of weird too. it definitely stands out for being really flat, static, and like weird character model proportions. I mean, they're really awkward. What I mean by that is that in certain shots, their torsos look really oversized. I don't really like harping on the animation quality because it's not really the animator's fault, as they're often really overworked and underpaid to the point where it seems like a human rights issue. This is more directed at Toei and the corporate people. But yeah, it does stand out though. Anyways, calling back to all of Sanji's previous big fights like Kurobi or Mr. 2 Bonkure, like his finishing combo on Kurobi was ineffective against Mr. 2, now his combo that he used to finish off Mr. 2 proves to be ineffective against Jabura, as we see him go through the Bascodes, Lonju, Tendoron, Franche, Kwashe, or Kashi Q, Jare, and Volshot. They all are completely blocked and ineffective against Jabura. Jabura then goes into his lying trick as he did with Usopp, but this time he gets even more detailed, and we even get sort of that picture book story of how Robin and he were long lost siblings. This expanded story, like I mentioned in the differences section, was completely made for the anime, which I actually commend them for because it's pretty hilarious. And then Sanji goes in for the key like he's been fooled completely, hook, line, and sinker. But of course, Sanji is not going to fall for that and just uppercut kicks him into the ceiling. Sanji, during all this, manages to sneakily get the key from Jabura and plays a little trick on Jabura himself. Now, by faking running away with the key, then gets in a cheap shot, which is fun to see. But this pisses off Jabura, of course, and causes Sanji to take a few heavy blows. Then Sanji does something really unexpected as he starts spinning like crazy on one foot. And the result of that is that his foot is now glowing hot like it's on fire, as he dubs it the Devil's Foot, the Diable Jambe, which means devil's leg in French, which is a really cool technique and look, but this technique still continues to make no sense and puzzles the One Piece fandom to this day, I feel like. I have more to say about this in a little bit, but in the meantime, Sanji explains that with the added heat, it increases the speed and destructive capability of his kicks, as we immediately see how effective the Diable Jambe is, as it not only deals added searing damage, but is able to bypass Tekkai altogether, which is pretty mind-blowing. Sanji then takes a hit in the gut to lure Jabura into a false sense of security, but then finishes him off with an awesome new flambage shot and meteor kicks him straight down like 4 stories into the floor. And I love sort of the poetic nature of the way Sanji finishes the lying trickster Jabura with a little bit of trickery of his own. And yeah, I really enjoyed that. It's a very, like I said, very poetic. Okay, so circling back to what I said a little bit ago. So Diable Jambe, this is so hard to explain. And while this might be a bit of spoilers, but because even with the added info, it doesn't really do much more to explain it. But there is some more info about it that could possibly go to explain it, but doesn't quite do it. Anyways, I'll go into what that actually is in the spoiler section. But yeah, this move is one of those things in One Piece that you just kind of like take at face value and just say, yeah, okay, Sanji can light his leg on fire without burning himself or his pants or his shoes for that matter. Similarly, I'll talk about Zoro's finisher as well, which also is very similar in the way I just kind of explain it. But with that, Sanji is the latest victor among the Straw Hats, which just leaves Zoro. But before that, unfortunately, Spandam has gotten Robin to the Bridge of Hesitation, the last stretch to the ever-impending Gates of Justice. However, Robin is determined to fight and buy as much time as possible for the others to reach her. Spandam at this point is an irredeemable bastard who you just want to see get his just desserts so badly with how terrible he's treating Robin. Like seriously, the way he just keeps talking and talking while stomping on her head, it's just so irritating, especially given the fact that he doesn't even really have any strength or power. He's just been gifted all this, which makes it even more irritating. And again, this is a testament to Oda's ability to make such hateable villains. I mean, you just like really want to reach into the screen and just punch this guy in the face. There is some hope though, as Frankie has now caught up to where Luffy and Lucci are battling, and hopefully Frankie can sneak by Lucci while Luffy holds them off. But returning to Zoro versus Kaku, Zoro has finally decided to get serious as he put on his bandana, And I love the meta commentary by Kaku asking Zoro if he puts on the bandana, does he get stronger? And Zoro just coyly reacts, "Who knows?" And when we as a viewer know all too well that that is definitely the case. So get ready for this next portion of this podcast episode because there's going to be a lot of wordplay because there's so many wordplay with all the moves and different things in this episode and particularly with the Zoro and Kaku fight. So yeah, Zoro uses a trio of new Nitoryu moves or two-sword style moves called Nigiri, Toro, Otoro, Hirameki, and Samon, or respectively dual cut, tower climb return, flash, and ripple. But also, this is another one of Oda's like food puns for Zoro's moves, as nigiri is in reference to like nigiri sushi or hand-rolled sushi, and toro is an expensive cut of fatty tuna. So he's essentially screaming out here, fatty tuna sushi roll, which is pretty funny. Then the other two are also sushi, as otoro is an even more fatty and more expensive cut of tuna, said to be the most fatty and tasty of the tuna cuts. And I would have to agree. It is really good. It's also really expensive. Then you get hirameki is a type of sushi buffet. And then the final one, samon, is translated as ripple, but it's more directly translated as sand waves, which is basically what you see in like the bonsai tree little things. And you see like that little rake that you run through the sand to make those pretty ripply art. And this last one, the pun should be pretty obvious, as samon sounds awful lot like salmon, which is another fish that's commonly used in nigiri sushi. There's another one later on, but I'll talk about it here. But when he clashes with Kaku and uses the Nigori Zake, the move where he buffs up his arms by the two gorillas, or whatever that means, Nigori Zake is translated as two gorilla slash, or directly it would be like two strength slash. But the food related double meaning here with this one is that nigori sake is unrefined sake or cloudy sake. It's a style of sake alcohol that apparently hasn't been refined, so it looks really cloudy and has sort of like really fine rice bits in it to make it give it that cloudy look, as opposed to clear color of the traditional sake. Now, I had to look all this up because I don't really drink alcohol. Well, more like I can't drink alcohol. But anyways, so that was really interesting to learn about. And I mean, honestly, this is another one of the reasons why Zoro is my favorite character. His move names are always so fun and funny, especially to, if when you look it up, or if you're a native Japanese speaker and you like read these moves, it just sounds ridiculous that he's screaming out these sushi names. And it's so funny. But we're not done with the move puns and wordplay yet, as Kaku also has his own set as well, playing on the word kirin, which is giraffe in Japanese. So the first part of the word kiri means to cut or slice, or kiru. For example, with the technique giraffe slice, or giraffe scythe. Scythe in Japanese is kama. So, and when you cut something with a scythe, it's called kamakiri. So when you mash them together, you get kamakirin. When you add that end at the end, you get basically scythe giraffe or giraffe scythe. Man, I'm like mixing up my tongues here. The other interesting about this wordplay is that kamakiri, just by itself, is also the Japanese word for praying mantis as well. And I'm honestly not sure if it was also a reference to like the scythe-like arms that praying mantises have, but I'm assuming it does. And Kaku's not done yet with the wordplay. He uses a technique called mushikaku, which literally just means without blind spots, which sees him ridiculously transform his body into a square shape, like he's some sort of transformer robot, even though his devil fruit is an organic animal. And that's not even the main joke here, as shikaku means blind spot, but can also mean square. So when he finishes transforming himself into a square, he says, "I've become a square with no blind spot." To an English speaker, this really makes no sense because the joke and the wordplay is just completely lost in translation. So what Kaku is really saying here is, even though I'm a shikaku, aka square, I have no shikaku, aka blind spots. So he's essentially saying, even though I'm a shikaku, I have no shikaku. There's a third layer to this joke, as it's also a play on Kaku's name itself. If you haven't noticed already, Kaku is in the word shikaku, which is also why I presume Oda gave him a square nose and a square looking like body structure. Which, I mean, Oda is real. He's really going hard on this joke, but it is pretty entertaining. But with the new absurd looking form, Kaku starts stupidly waving his four legs, and at first Zoro, as well as us, the viewer and reader, are like, what is happening here? And then Kaku reveals something pretty scary, as he's been shooting off a ton of mini Rankyaku slashes upwards, only to bounce them off the ceiling down onto Zoro and leaving an incredibly destructive attack on him, and leave it to Oda to make something so stupid looking be so devastating. Zoro at first tries to deflect them all, but eventually it becomes too much, and all he can do is just block but take most of the hits. Also, another side tangent about more Japanese wordplay, because again, it may make no sense with the whole giraffe insult with Zoro that Zoro uses on Kaku after this whole attack, to which Kaku gets annoyed about. This is again a play on Kaku's sort of Japanese old man speaking style that I mentioned when he was first introduced, where he talks like an old man by ending many of his sentences with the suffix ja. And Zoro is annoyed himself at Kaku now after taking so much damage, so he starts calling him Kirinja, and Kaku then takes offense to this and says he's not a Kirinja, he's a Kirin, and then ends the sentence with ja like he would normally. And it just sounds like he's confirming Zoro's insult. So in real time, it just sounds like he's saying Kirinja, no, I'm a Kirinja. And so he's basically just insulting himself, which is the joke. And he can't. And the funny thing is Kaku can't help it because that's just how he talks. Zoro then determines that next, in order to win this fight, he needs to somehow cut through the tech guy, and determines if he needs to cut through something called an iron body, he'll use the move that was able to cut through Mr. One, a literal Iron Man, and uses the Shish Son Son. But Kaku, seeing that the Shish Son Son is dangerous, he opts to actually deflect it rather than tanking it with Tekkai instead. And here, like we saw with Sanji, Oda likes to up the stakes by showing that the old finishers are no longer effective, so Zoro will now have to rise above his old limits to figure out a new way to defeat this stronger opponent. And I remember wondering and being very curious as to what new technique he was going to use. We do get a cutaway from the fight to catch up with Luffy, but as I mentioned, this is just more filler, and I'm just going to go right back to the Zoro fight. But another thing I really like about this fight is that it's really fun that we get to see someone getting used to and learning their devil fruit and its capabilities in real time. Usually when we see people or villains, we usually see them after they've somewhat at least mastered the fundamentals of how to use their fruit. But here we see Kaku literally trying new things, learning things on the fly. And we first see Kaku compress his neck down to create a spring-loaded type of attack with his bigang, or nose shigang. And I love Zoro's response to this as, is that how giraffes work? And Kaku then uses the giraffe cannon to fire himself at Zoro and calls it the Giraffe Blast. But in Japanese, this move's quite awesomely named, and it's called the Kilimanjaro, which obviously refers to the mountain found in Tanzania, Africa, where a lot of giraffes can be found. And again, this is actually a wordplay because in Japanese, when you say Kilimanjaro, the first part of it kind of has the word kirin, or giraffe, and so when he says it, it sounds like Kilimanjaro, and so it sounds like he's actually saying kirin or giraffe in it, so it sounds really cool. And I gotta say, Kaku's pretty creative here on the fly. The next moment never ceases to get a huge laugh out of me because of the performances here, as Kaku accidentally over retracts his neck and pushes his legs out further somehow, like a pasta maker, which Kaku calls it a pasta machine. But both their surprised reactions are funny as hell. But particularly Zoro's reaction to all this is so damn funny. First, he's like, what the hell kind of setup is your body? Then Kaku, who clearly unintentionally did that, after an awkward pause where he's working it out in his head, like you can literally see it as they pause, decides to then try to play it off like it was his idea all along, and then even dubs at the pasta machine. And Zoro calls him out on the bullshit and yells at him, "Don't be making up move names on the spot." And if that wasn't enough, Kaku gets all serious and ominous, complete with like intense music about how this new stance with the short neck and the long limbs will give him access to more deadly techniques to defeat Zoro. But then he uses the same Kilimanjaro move, which he just yells at him, "You couldn't come up with anything, could you?" And this whole interaction is just so ridiculous, but it's so damn funny because of like, I think it's the sort of the juxtaposition of having these intense, deadly moments mixed in with like these ridiculous reactions from both Zoro and Kaku. Kaku is then forced upstairs due to a Tatsumaki move from Zoro, but then returns with these like two long Odachi katanas, which begs the question, why does Kaku even have these? Like he would, in his normal form, he would not be able to wield these swords. Then Zoro then uses a technique called Hyokindama, or leopard spinning shot, or I guess directly translated as leopard koto ball shot. The koto is a traditional Japanese string instrument that kind of resembles a guitar, but not really. And I honestly don't know what the double meaning is with this move that I can tell. The only thing that comes to mind is that if you kind of say it differently and mispronounce it, you could say it as Hyokindama, which is just leopard testicles. I don't know if he was trying to take a shot at Lucci or something. And I tried to look this one up, and I really couldn't find the pun or the double meaning in this one. So if you do know it, let me know. However, after a while of taking a bunch of hits and crap from Kaku, Zoro finally gets pissed and begins to give off this strange shadowy aura in the shape of a three-faced demon. Then something, to this day, I still can't fully explain what happens here, but here we go. The shadowy demonic aura isn't just something for us, the audience/reader, to see, as Kaku himself is able to see it and reacts to it. So that tells me that it's actually ethereal and really there. But then Zoro actually seems to sort of manifest two more sets of arms and two more heads, and dubs it the Kiki Kyutoryu Ashura, or Ghastly Nine Sword style Ashura. This is the part where the move really lost me and I stopped being able to explain it. And I have never really found a clear answer to this either. Like, is he actually manifesting more limbs? I don't think so. Or is this some sort of mirage or mental trick, like imposing willpower onto your opponent so he doesn't actually have more body parts? I don't think. And it's just that he's so intimidating that his opponents start hallucinating under Zoro's immense willpower or fighting spirit. And that's probably what is happening, as Kaku does have a line that says, quote, "He can show such powerful illusions with his fighting spirit." But if that's the case, and that's in fact what's happening, how does that actually add to Zoro's overall power with the 9 swords? Like, it's really hard for me to make sense of this. And I've never really found a satisfying explanation from anyone else either. I mean, because it's not like Luffy's Gomu Gomu no Gatling, where Luffy is just moving so fast it looks like there's multiple arms. But Zoro doesn't appear to be moving at all, so this move is just another one of those things that I just kind of take at face value, like Sanji's Diablo Jambe. And I'm like, okay, Zoro just manifests extra limbs, but just an overall very confusing technique. And just as a brief aside too, Ashura in Buddhism and Japanese folklore is, I had to look this up, but is like a demon/god that does have a humanoid look with 3 heads and the 6 arms. And like the move, they're often depicted as loving combat, war, and are very prideful about being stronger than everyone. Sounds a lot like somebody we know. So it's very fitting for Zoro. But yeah, as Kaku gears up for another massive Nankyaku that seems like he's intent on fully splitting the Tower of Law, Zoro lunges at him with the Kyutoryu form and kind of just disintegrates the Nankyaku slash into a mist, which, okay. And then proceeds to finally cut through it all and deal a finishing blow with Ashura Ichibugin, or translating to One Mist Silver. I think in the sub it's called Ashura Silver Mist. And this is also a play on words, but not in the usual food variety, but instead it's a play on old ancient Japanese currency, as Ichibugin is the name of the silver coin thing that is worth a quarter of a ryo, which is those oval shaped gold coins you see in many like feudal Japanese media, whether it be games, movies, or TV shows or other anime. You see it actually on top. A good example I just thought of. You see it on top of Meowth's head, the Pokemon, the cat Pokemon. That's what's on his head is a gold ryo, and so an Ichibugin is worth a quarter of that. But yeah, this move is really powerful and cool, but I find it very, or not very, but kind of unsatisfying because I just don't understand the move. And so this is definitely the finish of this fight has always left me a little bit unsatisfied, but it's not that big of a deal. Everything else surrounding this fight was really cool, and even this next part, the sort of the epilogue to the fight, with Kaku defeated in a really cool callback and fulfilling his promise to Polly, just before they split up, Zoro relays to Kaku that they've all been fired. And I absolutely love that because even though it wasn't that long ago, because that line was such a throwaway line, you kind of forgot it. But I love that it comes back here. And I also love that in response, Kaku mentions that it'll be hard for him to find other lines of work as assassination skills aren't very useful outside of that. Then Zoro has a pretty witty comeback saying, "You can still work at zoos, can't you?" And I was like, that is so cold, but it's so funny. But yeah, I mean, that's another badass Zoro moment right there. One thing that this moment always seems to tell me was that despite his sort of antagonistic role, he is one of the few CP9 agents who isn't all out evil. Like, I just don't get the sense from him. And he's even the only agent that actually shows some form of remorse too after he's lost. And now that's not to say that he's a good guy or anything, but he is one of the more honorable and sort of honest CP9 agents. Like, I think one thing we often forget is that yes, the CP9 are portrayed to be evil, but at the same time they're technically part of the law, I guess you can say. Like, to them, they are the good guys keeping the peace in the world. So while the CP9 tends to attract a little bit more unscrupulous people, I think Kaku, while his like methods are very sort of still very brutal and very cold and calculating, he is still one of the more, I guess, honorable and honest type of agents. Unlike Lucci or like Khalifa or even Bluno, who just literally straight up just murder people and kind of look like they enjoy it. Now with Zoro's fight over, back to the mission at hand with Robin and Spandam, the Bridge of Hesitation has finally been fully expanded with the end nearing. Robin does everything in her power to survive to the point where she bites down on the bridge's concrete, which Robin's teeth are really strong here, is what I kept thinking. Despite how intense this scene is. And yeah, this scene is super intense with Robin beginning to show some real emotion and fear, wishing for everyone to save her and, fearing death itself. And it's a very hard scene to watch. But we then see Luffy and Frankie still struggling with Lucci as Frankie tries to knock Lucci away to get past him to deliver the keys to Robin, but Lucci completely overmatches him and attempts to kill him. But it's here Luffy finally decides to use Gear Second once again to save Frankie and finally allow him to pass. And I love that Luffy doesn't mess around when someone else's life is on the line and he just goes straight to Gear Second. And inversely, that jet pistol seemed to have pissed off Lucci and he's gone into his hybrid leopard form finally as well. So now we get to see round 2 with them going against each other as serious, as their serious modes have activated. And I have to mention that little exchange with Luffy about how when he's reminded of his defeat at Galila Mansion, Luffy says he's going to be fine because he ate meat. And it's like, that's not how human bodies work, but I love how Luffy's go-to treatment is always to eat meat. And it, for some reason, works. And anyways, we see that Gear Second is definitely a match for Lucci now, but the question is how long can Luffy last? But yeah, now that all the CP9 agents have been beaten, all that's left is Lucci. And I can't wait to get into the rest of this fight between them as we get to the meat of it, pun intended. But yeah, we'll talk about that on the next episode, as well as an amazing moment that I have been wanting to talk about for a while. Anyways, if you did enjoy this, send me a like or comment. And if you want to join me on this journey of rewatching One Piece, please consider subscribing. Check out my Instagram and Twitter account at SunnyGo Podcast for updates of new episodes and some random pictures. And as always, I wanted to thank you for taking the time to listen to my podcast. Small spoiler section here, just a really tiny one. Just kind of commenting on Sanji and his sort of weirdness, as well as there's a little tidbit about Zoro as well. But anyways, if you're not interested in that, stay safe out there, and I hope to see you on the next episode. Bye! Okay, so spoiler section. Again, these are always unscripted, so I'm just kind of rambling on. But the first thing I wanted to talk about is Sanji's Diable Jambe. And yeah, we kind of get a little bit more explanation about this in Whole Cake Island and in Wano, why this may be possible. It's because he's been enhanced. We saw the Germa experiments and the enhancements his brothers got, and he supposedly didn't get any, but he actually did. And so we see in Wano, we finally get sort of that interaction between him and Queen, talking about those enhancements, as he notices when Sanji uses Diable Jambe that he comments on the fact that, oh, that's a Germa enhancement. And yeah, it's interesting. But the thing is like, the enhancement that Sanji actually got, yeah, they're all more durable, but the actual main enhancement that Sanji got was the invisibility. And that's the main, trick that he has. Whereas, his other brothers have all the different, electricity, fire, and poison and whatnot. But, yeah, so it kind of goes to explain it, but it still doesn't really. I mean, I guess it kind of makes more sense after he's learned Haki, but then you don't really see Sanji using Busoshoku Haki or Armament Haki, so it's like, is he still protecting himself? And so, yeah, this move still confuses me even to this day. And similarly with Zoro's move, that also confuses me. But the thing I wanted to talk about with Zoro is I love this little tiny callback to the Kaku fight, because when in Wano, Zoro is fighting King, and King, when he turns into his the Pteranodon, it's so funny because there's a point in that fight where King starts to stretch his head and does his Temperadon laser attack thing, and he just kind of states, this is how dinosaurs in the past used to hunt, which is unequivocally not true because it's so ridiculous. But I love how Zoro this time doesn't even question it. He's like, oh, really? Or actually, I think he says something like, shit, is that right? And so he just doesn't even question it at this point. But I love how that sort of small callback kind of came back. I think there's also kind of a reference to that as well with the Queen fight with Sanji, as when Queen does his weird, I don't know how that move works, but when Queen goes into his sort of Brachiosaurus mode and fires his vertebrae out at a snake, and so his legs are still there and his torso is still on the ground, and then he's like, this is how dinosaurs work, and everybody's like, what? And they all question that. Yeah, it's pretty funny. But anyways, that's just a small reference that I wanted to point out, or at least I think it's a reference. I don't know if it is, but yeah, I think that's pretty much everything I wanted to talk about in this spoiler section. Sorry for the more rambling nature of this one. But yeah, thanks for listening, and I hope to see you on the next episode. See ya!